Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. Today, my guest is Margot Esther Borden. She is a psychotherapist, author, and coach. Primarily, she resides in Mumbai, i.e. Bombay, for those of you who remember Bombay, and other environs close to Bombay. And today, however, she's speaking to me from Arizona, and both of us have kind of connected over the last couple of years. We met at a conference in India in 2018, and since then we've kind of been keeping in touch as colleagues and friends. And we thought it would be good to reach out and do a podcast today to kind of follow up on some COVID stuff and our experiences of having been in India recently during the brutal second wave of COVID-19 virus there, and give our perspectives on what we think is going on and how things are developing for people psychologically as parts of the world wake up and become more active and vaccinated, and while other parts of the world are not so fortunate. So we thought that would be a really good thing to kind of branch off from, and we'll encompass some other wider ranging topics as well. So welcome to the show once again, Margot.
Thank you, Scott. It's good to be back.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, how are you doing?
I'm well. I just arrived back from India about 2.5 weeks ago, and I was pretty exhausted. I don't think I realized the stress while I was in it, and so it's sort of like once I got to safety, I think that's when the tiredness hit, and I think I'm speaking for both of us. I assume that there's
Well, what was your story? I mean, I know it, but if you could fill in the audience a little bit about what things were like for you as this second wave was taking off in India.
Yeah. So I started to hear about the numbers going up, and at any rate, I believe in being not afraid but careful, and I consider it my civic duty to wear a mask and to protect myself and others, and so I was, there were there was a particular town where I was where everybody wore a mask, and on the beach, and where all the Western tourists were, nobody was wearing a mask, and I just decided that I was going to do it, stay true to my beliefs. And as the numbers started going up, I became aware that people were behaving as if nothing was happening. And
were you in a city, or were you someplace secluded elsewhere?
I was in South Goa,
in
a small town on the beach, a little side story. I had a dog bite incident, and so I had to go to the public hospital, and Indians were wearing their masks under their noses, under their chins, and on their hands. So, not wearing them.
Was there a reason why they were wearing them but not wearing them?
Yeah, I don't quite understand. Sometimes I wonder if there isn't something like what's going to happen is going to happen, and I'm not in control, so why make an effort? Or
was there a nationwide fine as well for Because I know in Delhi there was a fine for like, I think it was 500 rupees or something if you were caught without a mask, even sitting in your car.
Yeah, I think definitely on the scooter, everybody wore a mask because you get pulled over. But people were lackadaisical. And I think in Goa, there was an assumption that I'm in Goa, it's the beach, everything's okay, nothing's going to happen. And yet, at its peak, the village, the area that I was in, reached a 50% positivity rate.
Wow,
In
50%. That's
50%.
That's insane. That's crazy.
Yeah. And so as I became aware that I was the only person distancing and wearing a mask, I decided that I would offer myself the gift of going into total isolation. And I spent 7 weeks, 23 hours and 55 minutes a day alone, and a couple minutes a day someone would come to clean my room or deliver food.
Okay. Wow. So how many weeks? How many weeks?
7 weeks.
7 weeks. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it was blissful. It was a gift I gave to myself. Why am I putting pressure on myself to engage with people that I see them, 10 people sitting at a table and they're mixing and matching with, there's like people coming and going. And I was like, why do I need to do that to myself, put myself at risk? And so there was no fear. It was more just like, I'm just going to honor my way of doing things, And
so, so you were there for 7 weeks. You had a dog bite. Did you got that checked out? Was it rabies?
Yeah, I had to get rabies shots. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was not fun to have to go to a hospital. I had 3 shots at the hospital, and then by then the numbers were so high, we found a nurse to come to my room and give me the last shot.
Wow. So that's quite a bit. And you were isolated. People in your vicinity were sick.
Yeah.
Any
the
deaths?
The property next to ours became a containment zone with 8 cases and 1 death. Just the adjacent property.
Wow.
So, it was a hot spot, and it may not have been, as bad as Uttar Pradesh, where people were, too many people were dying, but it was definitely danger. There was danger.
Well,
and people were behaving as if they're on holiday.
Well, they probably were. Many people there were probably on holiday and probably trying to get away from everything. And I guess statistically, if they were vaccinated, maybe they were okay. But if they weren't, no one was vaccinated. Oh, goodness, yeah. So, yeah.
So I started to analyze or try to put myself in the shoes of the people around me and understand where they were coming from. And what is it? And I here's my conclusion. Okay, I'm just gonna is that there are 3 different. I found 3 different ideas about why people weren't behaving as if there's a pandemic. And one is sort of just I can't do anything about it, so why bother? And one is wishful thinking. It's not going to happen to me. And another is willful ignorance. I'm in denial, active and sometimes aggressive denial that this is happening and that there's danger.
What do you think is behind the willful ignorance?
Wow. So I had an incident where I went to the water fountain to fill my bottle. There was like a filter that you could, and a person came up to me and saw me wearing a mask and said, "Oh, you're buying into the paranoia." And she was aggressive. I can't do an aggressive voice, but it was like obnoxious. And I just said, I'm not on holiday and I'm not a tourist. I live in this country and I can tell you of 1 or 2 deaths a day in my circles. Firsthand, this is not the news blowing stuff out of proportion. This is not hearsay. This is like people I know, and friends and family of people I know, and clients and their families, because I have lots of clients in India, and so I'm I'm not a full-time frontline worker, but I've seen it from the front lines psychologically with families and.
Well, yes. I mean, a little bit of self-disclosure here. I was in India for 2 weddings, which I went under duress because I had advised my wife for us not to go, but I went with her, and she was half vaxxed, but premature before it totally took one of the Pfizer BioNTech injections or jabs, and she became sick probably at the first function we went to. But we don't know. There's no way for us to tell. She could have gotten it in Chicago, and the thing about the virus is it can be with you for up to 2 weeks before it shows any symptoms, if at all. So the day before we were to leave, we got a COVID test, and she turned up positive, and she was being very symptomatic. So I had to rush and try to figure out what to do, and that included putting her on an ambulance while I was getting ready to come back to the States, because if I had stayed, I would have had possibly gotten sick, or I would have tested positive and not been able to get onto the plane whenever she was well. And I figured, since I was looking at the numbers while we were there, I could see that things were getting drastic. In fact, my wife was hospitalized in the period when Delhi was at its highest rate of infection. I'm kind of segueing. She's well now. She's back in the States. Everything worked out. Lots of stress for myself and the rest of the family. But she's well. She's back. But as per your description, we talk to people. Almost everyone she talks to in India who has people, family in India, infections, deaths, people who are vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson variant of vaccine that's there, those who are lucky enough to be part of the 3% of the population in India that's vaccinated, they're getting sick. Lots of 25-year-olds are getting sick and dying.
Yes.
So it's a horrendous picture right there. My feeling, which my acute stress from this situation has been pretty high, as you can imagine, as yours was as well, I'm sure, Margot. But my feeling on returning to the States was, okay, all those checkbox that I had for things that could go wrong in India as the numbers were going up and people were having a free-for-all with no masks and not socially distancing, could potentially crop up in anywhere, including the United States. So I didn't feel as much relief as, although those feelings are kind of abating a bit now, but when I came back, I immediately felt like I was going from a fire back into a frying pan, if you will. I didn't feel like I was actually... You can't escape the virus. It's going to do its thing. And you can't really negotiate with it. It's like you trying to negotiate with an avalanche. You look up, you see the snow is coming down, and you grab your loved ones or get yourself out of the way. It's kind of how... That's kind of, I think, how you have to deal with the situation. You have to use your head and just try to make the best of it. But many people aren't. And the willful ignorance that you were mentioning is I wonder where that's coming from.
So just to finish the water fountain scene, when I told her, that I actually knew of many cases that this isn't just the media, she said, "Oh, well, it's flu season." Okay, so this is my question. I try to open my mind and open my heart and understand what is going on, that we would disconnect from reality and from pain and from things we can't control. That we kind of create a story that's convenient so we feel in control. And in so doing, we close our hearts and we create even further distance and therefore disconnection and dissociation from ourselves, our vulnerability, our pain, and from our fellow humans. And so watching this kind of this disconnect from our own humanity and our vulnerability and reality.
Well, it's kind of a false attribution, right? You're trying to come up with a story as to why you have a belief system, which is much of what we do as human beings is make up a story about what's going on with us, and that story might be history, or it might be religion, or some kind of personal myth. So it sounds like she was in denial.
Oh, yeah, but a denial and aggressive, like about, not anybody threatening that. So it's like defensive denial, you could say.
So she was defensive towards you because you were poking a hole in her story?
I didn't challenge, actually, when she said, it's flu season, I just said, okay, and I walked away. Because it wasn't...
Well, yeah, I don't think you were intentionally, but the fact that you were wearing a mask was poking a hole in her story.
Yeah, exactly. It was a threat to her that I was doing it my way, and that threatened that she, whatever it was, and yeah.
Well, I'm curious, was she from Europe, or was she from the States, or?
European. Yeah, a Western tourist in Goa. So, and I won't go there because I'm opinionated.
Well, okay, yeah. I'm sure it's great for the environment. Loaded sarcasm there.
Yes. Yeah.
So, all right. So, some Euro trash. I'll be mean and say Euro trash, perhaps.
That's good. That's a good and suitable term that we don't have to Yeah, but it's like, what makes us shut off from the pain and the vulnerability and fabricate a story, an aggressive story, so we don't have to feel, connected to the tragedy that's going on right outside our door or sometimes in our homes, and what makes us harden ourselves, against reality, so we don't have to feel the pain. Really, well, that was where I, philosophically, where I sat.
Well, I mean, that's mostly in psychotherapy, I think that's what you deal with all the time. Like you try to engage with the person based in their reality, and then you try to maybe subtly change it. Or when there's an impasse with the therapeutic alliance, sometimes you say, well, wait a minute, let's step outside of this. How is this like how you're dealing with these other issues in relationships we might have, or so on and so forth? It's one way of looking at it. But
what I'll usually do is just say, for example, if let's say we had a session together and she had been my client and I'm wearing a mask and she's not, and she's being aggressive toward me, I would just say, I'm wondering how you're feeling right now.
Yeah.
As simple as that. My heart feels aggressive, or I feel justified, or like whatever.
Absolutely.
And then you start.
And then you start to unpacking it. Correct. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Because the stories are only there to defend the reasons why we're protecting ourselves from our own vulnerability, and that's kind of the bottom line.
Well, it's a bottom line in a lot of parts of life, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how do we, rather than building defenses and stories and against our vulnerability, not just now in COVID, but as a society, which separates us again from our own relationship to ourselves and our humanity, but it also separates us, from others, and from creating a cooperative society rather than a kind of a individualistic, how can we move from like that independence, which is sort of, I think it's an artificial construct and a not it's not as wholesome as we could be if we could embrace our interdependence, and that we're all in this together. And that was a huge issue, and it's been a huge issue in COVID. COVID, which brought out the weaknesses in our system, rather than coming together as societies and as countries and working together. We fell through the holes in the floorboards in many ways as humanity as a whole, and so it's like, how do we understand and make meaning from this, how we handled it, and where do we go from here? How do we open our hearts and like come together as humanity?
Right. That's a very good question. And perhaps even the thinking patterns that are built into our society is precisely what got us into this mess with having a virus, right? I mean, there's a lot of stink about the virus coming out of a lab. Ho-hum. I mean, it's here. And more than likely, it's probably because of people chipping away at nature and interacting with animals and insects and whatnot. And the more we eat away at nature, the more buffer there will be to such things as diseases. But it's the never-ending consumption of nature as something contra humanity, rather than that interplay, that intersection between us and the world. Interdependence between everything. Yeah. So when you say interdependence, I'm thinking with the koala bears, with the crows, with the every nature in general, what we call nature, which is just our relatives, our distant cousins.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, it's so painful to see what we're doing to ourselves, each other, and nature, that we harden our hearts, and then we're even further, and it's like this kind of downward spiral where there's like, where do we stop? Where do we get out of that spiral and say, wait, I'm spiraling in the wrong direction, and it hurts, and I'm hurting myself, I'm hurting others, I'm hurting nature, and like, maybe it's time to turn in and look at myself and face what's going on inside, and I think that's the only way out of this.
Well, do you see much hope for people at this point in time using this as a jumping off point to being more heart-centered or more focused on what's real, rather than defenses and stories that don't have much basis in this interdependence?
Right. So on a spiritual level, intuitively, I have nothing but compassion and hope. I see this crisis as an opportunity, and this crisis has been building and building and building, and how many times, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I'm reading books from 50 years ago that are watching the crisis start to happen, and see that we're still in it, but it reaches a kind of and we've been at, how long have we been at breaking point? Like, I'm overworked, I'm stressed, I don't feel connected, my life is meaningless, I'm a cog in the wheel. How do we see this in our clients? And so I've been like hearing this, I'm at breaking point on an individual and collective level for a long time, and so on on the big picture level, I feel like this is a time for us to break the sort of the beeline for self-destruction in every dimension and every aspect of life, and open into ourselves. And I see it happening with my clients, whether it be the people I coach at the top corporate people in multinational corporations, and the overtly spiritual people. Everybody from all walks of life are asking themselves, turning inward and asking themselves fundamental questions, and making a profound shift in what's important and how they relate to their, to their humanity and to nature. It's just happening spontaneously.
That's good. Let me ask you this: do you watch any of the media, like especially the news, national news, or social media news, or things like that? And have you, like, I notice that there's this push within the media, which are all owned by corporations, which all tend to, from my perspective, they tend to benefit from people being rats in a maze or cogs in a wheel, endless production and consumption. There's a push for that to happen again, to go back to the way things were before, as if people want that, as if everybody wants to go back to the way it was before. What do you think of that?
So the kind of back to the way it was before is not going to happen. I think it's, again, wishful thinking, but it's like, how do we live in harmony with ourselves, our hearts, our souls, our families, our nature, and technology, and medicine, and science, and like it's about, in a sense, finding a cohesive and whole way forward with everything that exists in the world and in the universe. For me, that's the way forward, and we're innovating it, and it's disruptive, and there's resistance, and it's going to be messy, and life is messy. Life is messy. It's chaotic, but behind the chaos, I believe there's an implicit order, or as David Bohm, an implicate order.
Okay, an implicate. Yes, yeah.
There's something. There's a force of wholeness of which we're all a part, and in that wholeness, it's a mess. There's good and bad and evil and destruction and coming together, but that we're all enveloped in this universe, physical but also spiritual universe, and that it's when we come into, I would say, in our hearts, a sense of awareness of that. I read a fascinating sentence the other day in a book. I was reading a book by Bede Griffiths, A New Vision of Reality. And Bede Griffiths was a Benedictine monk who moved to India and created like a ashram where it was like all religions, but it was, living in harmony with all religions. It was beautiful, and I had the opportunity to spend 10 days with him in 1991 before he passed away.
Oh,
beautiful,
wow.
Beautiful.
Wow.
And so in this particular paragraph, he said, if I look at a tree and I see a tree, I'm not seeing truth. I'm seeing illusion or Maya. And why is that? If I look at that tree and implicitly know that tree is part of the universal whole of which we're all a part, that I see that tree as something that belongs to a greater whole. It's not, you see what I mean? It's like that tree is everything that's manifested in this universe is all one. It just has different facets, but it's all the same, and it all leads to the same place, and it all comes from this, the implicate order, the wholeness, the underlying wholeness of everything, or Indra's net, as it's called in Hinduism and Buddhism. And I was like, oh my God, I had a wow moment. Like, it's when I see you as we're all one. And I see, objects and people and nature. We're all just part of one. But that I know that in my being, that I'm seeing the truth.
Okay. Let me play devil's advocate here and say, okay, so like in this, I understand this. I'm on the same page with you. And you could even say the tree isn't separate. from anything else because you're part of its circulatory process. It's in breath
that
and
tree
out
is
breath,
me.
right? The tree
I'm
the tree is connected to a huge system of roots and fungi that connect trees and other plants to each other, and it's a roost for sparrows and other birds to come nest in, right? I mean, it's more than just a tree, right? And the tree is just an idea. It's one idea, right? It's not the wholeness of that idea.
But it's not an object. It's
right.
It is.
Exactly.
I am that tree, and that tree is me. And what we're talking about, I'll interrupt you just for a sec, because a thought came that this is the polar opposite of how we're living. I'm separate. Nature's mine. This is my gas, my land, I'm going to, get more, I'm going to use chemicals to get more yield out of my crops, and I'm going to exploit rather than realize that I can't exploit nature. I'm exploiting myself.
Yeah. Long-term use will create the situation we're in. Yeah.
Right.
But
right.
how, but knowing that, how do you hold that in place? I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do you hold that in place and handle the people who are willfully ignorant to the point where they don't even want to hear this? Like this kind of symbiotic relationship everything has with itself. And also in your day-to-day, you should be able to flip back and forth between me being an isolated creature in the world to get my shopping done, my this, that, and the other thing done, but then hold space for the wholeness of things. I think, right? That's the balance. But how do you teach other people to hold that balance, or even get them on that page?
Okay, I'll just come back to how you presented the question, and then I'll answer the question. Is that there's being, which is, and there's doing. And I don't have to separate myself from being for doing. The ideal is to be in my being and allow the doing to come from the being, whether it's doing my accounting or, doing my grocery shopping, that I'm not separating from my being to get stuff done. It's connected to my being, and how do we do that? Well, I did a workshop a couple weeks ago with Eve Ensler, who's now called V, and she's the well-known author of Vagina Monologues and some just powerful books and talks, and I asked her that question.
Okay, good.
How do you, how do you talk to the diehard, people who are just like the girl I met at the water fountain? And I loved her answer. And I knew her answer, but it was good to hear it. You listen. And when you listen with an open heart and an open mind and open ears, people talk, and they need to feel heard, and they need to feel understand. And behind all those defenses, because that's what it is that causes us to barricade ourselves in a hard and hateful, angry, what would you call it? Layer of protection is pain and fear and vulnerability. And so when we can hold space for that, we touch the other person's heart, and then magic happens. And everyone has a heart, and everyone has a soul, and it just might be hidden behind lots of defenses and stories and justifications and anger. But when you listen fully, everyone gets behind all that noise, and their heart starts to open, and we meet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we connect.
Where do you think that it seems like those defenses and whatnot just kind of develop naturally, or are they cultivated by something?
I'd say that's a big, big question. It could be just I was raised in a family like that, or, so it can be conditioning and it can be wounding and it can be both. And I think it's both. And it's, that I develop defenses because it's too painful, because I feel vulnerable and I feel out of control, and I have to create a storyline or a belief system that helps me feel more in control. And that storyline can be anything from, just anger, like an angry self-righteous pose, or it can be conspiracy theories. That I need a story so that I can feel like I am master of my vital space, my life, so that I can feel there's a reason and I'm justified. And yeah, I like to look at truth okay, I think I don't need to explain this. So when we're in touch with our truth, it's quiet. And if the truth that you're feeling is like angry and full of justifying and shouting and self-righteousness, that's not truth. It looks like truth because we're feeling it and it feels real and we're convinced, but that's a defense mechanism. Oh yeah. However, when we don't recognize that we're angry and live consciously with our anger, then we project it into our actions in the world and we hurt our animals, our children, our families, ourselves. So it's not whether or not we're justified in having anger, but it's what do I do with that anger? Mm-hmm. That's important. Mm-hmm. I would say, what would you say?
I would agree. I think being conscious of it, sitting with it, not acting on it, not reacting.
Yeah, not acting out. Yeah.
Not acting out, right. I mean, sometimes if, in a fight or flight situation where it merits it, I think if you have to run or you have to, defend yourself against a physical attack, I don't think I think it's a healthy use of it, and probably where all of that originates from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to live in an angry stance.
Oh yeah.
Is a different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is also just detrimental to your health and your mental health.
And negative emotions like anger and fear morph themselves into what looks like truth. And so we don't even realize we're in it. And we're building our worldviews and our behaviors and our interpersonal dynamics based on something that is hurtful.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can rope this or kind of lasso this back to where we started all this, Margot. How does this apply to where we're going? I mean, obviously, we touched on the larger aspect of things. Like many people, myself included, I don't look forward to going back to the way things were. In fact, I would say that in the last 3 to 6 weeks, my experience with my wife's illness and leaving India, I thought I'd gotten to the point where I was starting at baseline and minimal in my own truth before that happened. But I was wrong. I think it brought me down to like getting back more to my core and what I want, which was a great experience, painful as it was. But I'm sitting more in my core now, my sense of self, my truth, if you will. And I certainly don't want to go back to being hectic and doing things because, I'm being pulled by an outside, arbiter, So it's just kind of sitting in, what do I want? What do I want my life to look like, rather than basing it upon internalized messages in my head or things that are external, right? So I think people are there.
Right.
And coming from that truth is great, but we do have these factors that are trying to rewrite the story. Oh, that was a year. we're all done now. We can go back to consuming. The job numbers are more important than people's physical and mental health and well-being. They have, we have at this recording, people are complaining about no one wanting to go back to work who had horrible jobs before COVID. Right. Many of whom, I assume, are just reassessing their lives as well, going, wow, what do I want? Yeah. And those economic indicators, I think, are driven mostly by finance folks, not by truth, not by people's personal best interests. So how do we go forward? Like, what do you think is a way forward, or is it just going to happen, like you said, organically? Do you think that organically society is going to be shifting into something very different, morphing into something hopefully more humane and maybe less toxically masculine and more balanced with some femininity?
Yeah. I would say that there are many people, and I think we can say in myself, my friends, my clients, that are just shifting, in a very organic way, as you say. And then there are people who are just, going about business as usual and not really paying attention. And then there are the diehard people who are like, we're going to get that economy going and we can keep growing it, and like that more, bigger, better, faster illusion that is definitely not aligned to our souls or to nature, but aligned to this willful ego that is again perhaps running away from the vulnerability of just being human. And so I would say that there's a huge shift in the people who are just organically opening into those places in themselves through loss, through life experiences, or just through openness to, go with that flow where it's taking us. And then there's going to be some disruption, and there's going to be some destruction, and some of the institutions, the belief systems that refuse to budge as things are naturally changing. I think there's a sort of just as we shifted from a matriarchal to a patriarchal view, sort of organically over tens of thousands of years. The patriarchal view is addictive, and it's self-fulfilling, and so we've driven it as far as it can go to where we're in self-destruct mode in terms of our own emotional and spiritual lives, and then that those are going to have to break. I don't think they're going to give without breaking. So there's going to be destruction.
Destruction of the old system, you mean?
Yeah. And I'm not for destruction. I'm not advocating it, but in order for things to shift, the institutions, belief systems that are not going with the flow of moving back toward wholeness are going to, it's going to be disruptive. I don't think there's another way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it maybe not. Maybe it's a natural crumbling, but it seems to be happening so fast. It seems like everything has come to a head, and I think psychically or mentally, people are so at ill ease with the way things were before. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our bodies, minds, and souls are crying out, saying, enough. Like, I need to stop and take care and get back in touch with what's important. And it's been a tremendous opportunity for those of us who aren't in survival mode and who've had the luxury of listening and being able to just honor the call to shift back into a more fundamental and wholesome way of being with ourselves, each other, and the planet.
Yeah.
But then, again, there's those who didn't have that opportunity or who don't know how, and then there's those who are fighting against it.
Mm-hmm. So having this still point for about a year or so where people could actually reflect on things, I think that's been very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we can shift back to the idea of the pandemic and how, and not really the pandemic, I'll just say the virus, what it's doing, what it's up to. And my thoughts are that the virus is here for at least another couple of years, doing what it does before it just becomes more like the common cold or flu.
Right.
Probably, I've heard some people who were virologists say 5 years, 10 years. It could be back like little outcroppings that we have to take care of. But certainly, if as a unified whole, humanity and the nations and the monolithic structures that we deem as running it don't become more cooperative with each other, we will not stop this anytime soon.
Right. Instead of polarizing, we can. If we come together, we
have to fuse. You have to be a lot less binary and be a lot more non-binary, with each other, with ourselves. So that being said, my feeling is that the U.S., even though we're all clapping our hands and the corporate media is telling us it's great that we're getting back out into the streets and busy, as Michael Valentine Smith might say, that's not necessarily going to be a good thing, because the virus is going to do what it does, and there's 50% at this point at least of people are unvaccinated in this country, and that's not good. And even if they were vaccinated, the virus is still going to do what it does, which is to mutate and get past defenses, physical defenses and immune system. So what do you think will happen? Poor India is still just, the brain power that's lost there, and the youth that's being killed, and whole families are being wiped out, or chunks of them. The collective grief and trauma that's going on there right now, and the anger towards the current government, right, that has sat back and cried crocodile tears and done nothing and mishandled this. And also, people don't realize how interconnected we are. But if you look at trade, India is, like, for instance, produces most of the brass products or even just raw brass, right? I play a wire-strung harp, which uses brass strings. Guess what's been happening since tariffs and COVID? What will happen now? Who will fill those jobs if all of the people who work at foundries are not there? Pakistan's will be happy to pick, because they're sort of weathering this storm a little bit better than India. But, it's a huge part of the global economy is what happens in India. And this will have a huge effect on trade. It will have an effect on the economy. A lot of people, a lot of services are shopped out to people working in India. This will have a huge impact on India's economy, and that will send ripple effects everywhere. Yeah, we need each other on the planet to keep that, that busy going.
And yet we're behaving as if we don't.
Correct. Yeah, we really should be vaccinating India right now.
Exactly.
And offering more relief. Anyway, I kind of spiraled a little bit there.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what you think. Well, I'm seeing this big picture as being kind of an ongoing difficulty for the current structure of things, but also how things will redevelop and shapeshift as we go along.
So, on one hand, you're looking at it systemically and economically, and like how the world functions, that everything is globalized, and we are interdependent, even though we act like we're not. We are, and we're facing that rude reality as supply chains are interrupted, etc. But my sense is at least astrologically, but also having studied past pandemics. That was one of the first things I did when I heard we're in a pandemic. I looked it up in the dictionary, and then I went online and I looked at documentaries from past pandemics. So I think we're in for the next year to year and a half, we're going to be having waves. And we can either, when the wave is over, go back to business as usual and pretend nothing's there and ignore that it's happening in other countries, even though we're right now having a lull, or we can, dare to see that first of all, we're all in this together as a planet, as humanity and as nature, and expect reality to be as it is, not as we want it to be, or that we willfully want it to be. And how do ask ourselves the questions in terms of our own mental health and also harnessing any opportunities. How do I want to live the next year and a half of my life and thereafter, knowing that we're in we're going to have waves of pandemic locally and globally, and how do I want to live with this? Is there something I can do for myself, my family, my loved ones, my other countries? Like, how do we, and it's a question really we can ask our heart, and let the heart make the decisions, like not like jump in and be a rescuer or whatever, but what is my place in this system of this planetary system of which I'm a part. So to see ourselves as whole and as part of a whole, and to behave that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems I'm getting the image of like the actual virus itself is a teacher.
It can be if we allow ourselves to be taught. But it will teach us either way, whether it hits us on the hand with the back of a ruler or says, hey, open your mind and open your heart. There's an opportunity in this.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from, I'm kind of fudging it, from William Blake, The World, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. He was spoofing Swedenborg, right? Another mystic. But he says, the world will have the Bible of hell whether it will or won't. That's kind of the whole thing was kind of a parody. It's you're going to have these difficult, the difficult pill to swallow, whether you will or won't. You have to take both sides of opposites, right?
Yeah. And if we will, it gives us an opportunity to make meaning and to become whole with ourselves and each other. And if we won't, we can just keep, blaming, be angry, whatever, hold on to our points of view and be right about it, and not join the whole. So it's up to us, either way we're going to suffer, but we can suffer and make meaning and grow, and as individuals and as a whole, or we can suffer and just make messes.
Yeah. If we don't sit in our truths, as you will, if we sit in our heads too much. Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good spot to finish up for today.
It feels like a natural close. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been good.
Thank you, Scott. It was amazing as always to have a talk with you, and yeah.
Well, we'll see you soon.
All right. You take care.
Take care, Margot.
Thank you. Yes, bye.
for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know that the Psychology Talk podcast has a Facebook page and an Instagram page? It's true. You can find more information about other guests and episodes, as well as more information about psychology and mental health. And if you liked this episode, go ahead and like us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, or Spotify and leave a review. It helps us grow our audience and provide more quality shows. All material, copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.